few quick adjustments here. I first want to express my gratitude to our esteemed partners here at Hannon Library, especially Rhonda Rosen and John Jackson, whose continuous partnership has enabled remarkable events, much like the one we are gathered here for this evening. Me and my team sincerely appreciate working together with you in various capacities, but in particular on Faculty Pub Night, where amazing faculty authors like Dr. Selmi talk about their important and groundbreaking work on topics connected directly to global local affairs and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The acronym, of course, is UN SDGs. Dr. Selmi's book, Dawn, at Mineral King Valley, the Sierra Club, the Disney Company, and the Rise of Environmental Law, intriguing title indeed, vividly illustrates the pivotal moment when environmental activism gained momentum, leading to a more environmentally conscientious era. It sheds light on the importance of preserving natural landscapes and highlights the significance of public and private entities working together to protect our planet. This is ultimately a theme that resonates very strongly with the UN SDGs. What is so phenomenal, in my mind, about Mr. Selmi's work is that it engages multiple, 14 of 17 according to my count, SDG goals, including SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, SDG 13, climate action, SDG 15, life on land, and SDG 17, partnerships of the goals. These issues carry significant socio-political implications that not only impact our local communities, as we all know and have experienced, but have global significance for both our humanity and our planet. With that in mind, we extend an invitation to all of you to connect with our Office of Global Local Affairs as it continues to evolve, expand, and as we champion vital initiatives like the one Dr. Selmi's work will ultimately highlight today. Thank you once again for allowing us the opportunity to be a part of this wonderful event.
So, now's the time. Daniel P. Selmi is the Fritz V. Burns Professor of Real Property Law Emeritus at Loyola Law School, downtown LA. He specialized in land use law, environmental law, and appellate advocacy. Prior to joining the faculty of the law school in 1983, Selmi was a lawyer in the Natural Resources section of the California Attorney General's Office and was law clerk to the late Manuel L. Real, U.S. District Judge, Los Angeles. He is the author of numerous law review articles and several books, including the 2-volume treatise, State Environmental Law. He co-edits the 7-volume treatise, California Environmental Law and Land Use Practice. He is an elected member of the California Academy of Appellate Lawyers and was a recipient of a California Lawyer Attorney of the Year Award in 2011. He was the past chair of the State Bar Committee, which is now a section, on environmental law. So let's welcome Professor Dan Selmi.
Thank you.
There and now you can have it.
All right. Well, I'm happy to be here since I worked for the university for, I don't know, 40 years, and my son has a BA and an MA from here as well, so it's nice to be back. But there was, I'm trying to find it here, one problem I think is, Rhonda, we were discussing some questions she might ask me, and she said, the book is a page turner. That was good. And she says, which to be honest is not always the case with legal nonfiction books. So with that said, I won't spend much time on the law, I'll spend time on the tale. Because this book is about a tale, basically, a long-running tale, but one which coincided with the advent of the environmental movement in the United States and with the rise of environmental law. So it's that part I'm going to emphasize for you as we go through this. It's a little bit scattered as we go. I should also have to confess, while I appreciate being called doctor, I'm not. I don't have a PhD, as most of us at the law school don't. So I'm sure that's a disappointment to you, but that's just the way it goes. We have a bunch of other degrees. Okay, so the first thing you have to know is what is Mineral King Valley? And I always begin by asking, has anybody been there? And the answer, you've been there. And is it beautiful?
Yes.
It's utterly spectacular. It's now part of Sequoia National Park. You get there by heading up 99 and going near Visalia. And I would urge you to go if you're interested in these places. It's a throwback to the way places used to look. And it's utterly spectacular. A few pictures of it here. You can see this is the valley from a distance. A little bit clearer there. And this is the snow that's there. And that's what gave rise to the big dispute. Everybody who ever looked at it said this would make a fabulous ski area. They knew that from the 1940s. Now, one of the reasons it turned into such a big legal dispute is where it sits, or sat, I should say, at the time. And I hope you can see this, because the little part in the middle here that's darker, can you see that?
Yeah.
That's the Mineral King Valley. All around it, in 3/4, is Sequoia National Park. Famous place. But the Mineral King Valley was left out of the park. And the reason it was left out of the park was that there were mineral claims in it. For a short period, everybody thought they were going to get rich with the minerals there. It petered out and was a disaster, but because of that, it never became part of the park. But to get to it, you have to drive from Three Rivers through the national park to get into Mineral King. You see that? And now Mineral King was run by a different federal agency. Before the Park Service runs the parks, and they're dedicated to preserving the parks. And the people that ran Sequoia National Park were dedicated to preserving the sequoia trees, naturally, which is why the park was established. The Forest Service, though, was in charge of Mineral King, and their attitude is quite different. They're a user of natural resources, and so they were a big promoter of the idea of putting a park there. Okay. The idea of putting a park there started in the 1940s, but it really started to gather momentum in the early 1960s. And who was interested? That's the wrong place. That's the road to Mineral King. Anyway, which still looks, by the way, when did you go there?
2 or 3 years ago.
Is that what the road looked like? It's exactly the same day. All right, and you can see there is a sequoia tree right there by the side of the road. But people had ideas. And who had an idea? This is Walt Disney, in case you didn't know who Walt Disney was. If you've been to Disneyland, his picture's still around there all over the place, I guess. I haven't been there in a while. Walt Disney was a member of the team that put on the Olympics, Winter Olympics in 1960 in what was then known as Squaw Valley, now known as Palisades. Just had a big avalanche up there if you read the papers. And he got the idea he could build a better ski area. He put Disneyland in, was remarkably successful, the first big theme park, and wanted to branch out. He was an avid skier, among other things. This is a picture of him with the then governor of California, Pat Brown, in the middle there wearing the suit. I mean, you look, they're in Mineral King, actually. Walt Disney looks like he belongs there. Pat Brown looks like he doesn't want to be there because he has a suit and tie on. But he partnered with Walt Disney in this, to put the ski area there. Who else do we have? When Walt Disney wanted to, he had to apply for it. They put out a prospectus, and there were 2 main applicants that were very serious about it. One of them was Walt Disney. The second one's in the middle here. A guy by the name of Robert Brandt. Now, if you're really old, you'll recognize the singer on the left, but he plays no part in this, but the person on the right does. This was Robert Brandt's wife. Her name is Janet Leigh, was named Janet Leigh, and if you know your cinema at all, you may recognize this scene. Do you know this? Anybody know this? That's the shower scene from Psycho. Janet Leigh was a very successful actress. This was not nearly her only film. She was in all sorts of films with all sorts of people you'd recognize. But she was two things. She was Robert Brandt's wife, and she was very politically connected in the Democratic Party, both in California and all over the country. So Brandt was a serious contender to put the ski area in there. And he and Disney battled for it. Forest Service wanted Disney, no doubt about that, because Disney was a safe bet. Brandt, though, put up a big fight. And a part of the book tells the story about what happened there. It ended up going to Washington to be decided, and the White House ultimately had to intervene and get it decided. And so it went to Disney. Just a couple other things. It's a little more boring here. President Johnson. But this is Stuart Udall, who was the Secretary of the Interior. A fascinating individual. Not very well known. His son is certainly better known today. But fascinating. Probably one of the first people to get a huge environmental conscience in the early 60s. He wrote an early book on environmentalism. He was in charge of the Park Service. The road had to go through Sequoia National Park. He didn't want it. And he put up a big fight to stop the road from going through there. And ultimately, when it blew up into the press, into the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times, Johnson, the president, his office stepped in and forced him to agree to the road. Who else was involved? Well, that's Roy Disney in the middle. That's Walt Disney's brother. Walt Disney died, by the way, after getting the grant for here. Talk a little bit about the Disney company because they were in an interesting position. But the guy on the right was the congressman who was there, Bob Mathias, big supporter from the area, big supporter. At age 20, I think it's about 24, he'd won he'd won 2 gold medals in the past 2 Olympics for the decathlon. Very successful athlete and big promoter of the ski area. Start to get the idea here in California, all the public officials were in favor of this thing. All of them. It was unanimous at the time. Who else was involved in my tale here? This guy. Nice picture, huh? I'm sure you'll be not surprised to know this guy ended up being an academic. He's got the look, doesn't he? But this is the person who single-handedly got the opposition started to having the ski area in Mineral King. He was a geologist that moved here from Nebraska to Bakersfield, worked for Standard Oil of all people, but was an avid hiker and went to Mineral King and just fell in love with the place and thought it should not become a ski area, it belonged in Sequoia National Park. And he started, he put together a big report on it. And at this point, he had a problem. He was trying to get the Sierra Club to oppose it, but the Sierra Club's problem was this. In 1948, they'd agreed to the ski area. They thought there were a bunch of skiers there, and they thought it was a good idea. This was the only guy that was opposed to it. But he was very forceful and a brilliant writer, I should add too, for a geologist. He was a brilliant writer, and he gradually got the idea up in the Sierra Club chain of command. Okay, where are we here in my tale to you folks? This is the last person that's involved, a guy named Phil Burton. You probably never heard of him. From San Francisco came one, you know what, we're having this little problem keeping majority leaders in the House these days. Have you noticed this? They change every 10 minutes. Phil Burton came within 1 vote of becoming the Speaker of the House. It was a brilliant, he is the one who ultimately passed the legislation to get the area of Mineral King into Sequoia National Park, and he did it. It had to go through unanimously the last day, and some congressman from Louisiana stood up to object, and Burton ran at him and told him that if he didn't sit down, his state would never get another cent for its sugar subsidy. He sat down, the thing got passed. All right, there's your cast of characters. And why do I give you all this? Is because there's others that are very interesting too. But that's one of the reasons that it turned out to be, for me at least, so interesting. Okay, so this is what Disney was proposing. This is apart from his master plan there. You can see how There was immense potential for skiing here. There's just no question about it. And he put together an entire proposal for it. This is one of the drawings there for the ski area there that he had. What else we got here? There we go. More of it there. You can see the various tops of the various mountains where the skiing would come down. There was one ski run that was 2 miles long. But what happened? I told you everybody was in favor of this. What happened was environmental consciousness became an issue. But how did it start? Well, it gradually grew in the 60s. There were developments there. I won't go into them. I don't have time. But a couple of big things happened in 1969. One was this oil spill at Santa Barbara, which was a huge deal at the time. It was nationally covered. I mean, you have people there holding birds that are covered with oil, and it just became a national catastrophe. That was one thing. Here's another thing that happened in '60. This is the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland. It caught fire, and everybody watched it on television. Seems a little odd, doesn't it, when a river catches fire? By the way, I've done it 4 times before. But this is the one that got publicized. And all of a sudden, the environment became a huge issue in the country. People were concerned about it. Some polls showed it the #1 issue, even though the Vietnam War was going on. And it just got momentum and momentum. And so Mineral King was in the middle of this. The Sierra Club had finally turned around and decided to oppose it, but had gotten almost nowhere with it. Politicians were still in favor of it, and in 1969 the final approval for it came through. Stuart Udall had to give them the road was going to go through, they got funding from the road, California was going to pay for it, all of us were going to pay for Walt Disney's road. It was all ready to go, and so the Sierra Club was deciding what to do at the time because they'd run out of options, and they decided to file a lawsuit. Now you're thinking, big deal. Well, it was. There weren't environmental lawsuits then. There had been a couple before. One involving the Hudson River in 1965, and there were a few running around there, but there almost were none of them at the time. But they didn't have a lawyer, by the way. They decided to file suit, and they said, well, who's going to be our lawyer? They ended up going across the street and finding one of their buddies, one of the people that was on the board of directors knew some guy across the street. He was 35 years old. He'd never handled a case in federal court before. They hired him. He turned out to be brilliant. I mean, they had a great choice. But it was a big thing to file suit. Another reason it was big was the Forest Service was going to be livid when they filed suit. But they decided to do it anyway. They were at this time they were riding the crest of the environmental movement. They thought they had to make a stand for this. And so they ended up filing the suit. They didn't name Walt Disney, though, as a defendant. They just named the government. Because the guy they ran across the street and got for the lawyer, he was no fool. He said, do I want to look like I'm suing Disney? I mean, Disney was beloved in the country. It still is, I think, basically. But was beloved at the time. And he didn't want to do that. And he knew Disney had a lot of resources. So he didn't sue him. This presented a problem for Disney I can talk about in a second, I think. See what I got. So, all right, here's your 5-second lecture on what the legal issue in the case was. It may surprise you to know that you can't just walk into court and file a lawsuit if you feel like it. You have to have credential, and it's called standing. And what it means is basically you have to show you're injured in some fashion. So if there's something you don't like in the state of New York environmentally and you want to file suit, you probably can't do it because you're not injured by it. You live in California. It's the ability to bring a lawsuit in court. Now, if you wonder why appointments to the Supreme Court are such a big deal these days, it's because the law of standing is almost entirely made up by the court. It's a court-made doctrine. And at this time, it wasn't clear at all whether a group like the Sierra Club could bring a lawsuit. But they tried to do it anyway. This is what the Court of Appeal held here. We don't believe the Sierra Club alleges that a sufficient interest for standing. They said they didn't show that they were injured. The Sierra Club, John Muir, remember that guy? Been around, the Sierra Club had been around for 100 years, and it was all about the Sierra Nevadas. And the court said, no, that's not good enough. That won't allow you to sue. That shows you the kind of issue this case brought. So it ultimately gets to the Supreme Court, and I won't worry with that one. They hold, no, you can't bring the suit either. You don't have standing. But they do one thing. They say, here's what you could have done to show standing. You could have shown that you used the Mineral King area. You hiked out of there, that your people are going to use it in the future. But you didn't do that. Now, he didn't do it for a reason. And it was a pretty legitimate reason why the lawyer didn't argue it. But he was out of luck. Except one strange thing happened. The guy that was writing the opinion for the Supreme Court, a justice by the name of Potter Stewart, wrote the opinion saying that the Sierra Club had no standing. That was going to end the lawsuit. The ski area was going to get built. The day before the opinion gets circulated finally for publishing, he puts a footnote in. Can you see up there on the bottom? He handwrote the thing in. And what it says is that basically by holding that the Sierra Club has no standing here, we don't mean to say that they can't go back to the trial court and try to show the trial court they have standing. And unless he put that in, they couldn't have done it. So that saved the day for him. This tailgate prick is pretty interesting as you go through that, see what happens as it happens. Okay. So the middle part of my book is the law part about the standing issue, and it takes you through it. And actually, I mean, the hardest thing for me to write this thing, I'll talk a little bit later if Ron is going to ask me questions. The hardest thing to do was to try to combine the history of it with the law in the middle, because we're really trying to do two different things. But I think it worked out okay. At least it seems to have worked out okay. Now, where are we? It's 1972. Supreme Court has said the Sierra Club doesn't have standing. They run back into the court, and the court gives them standing. But this thing is raging as a controversy. This is Ramparts magazine in 1972. Disney's War Against the Wilderness. Little caricature of Walt Disney and, who is that in the right? Can you see who's on the right-hand side? Any Disney? Bambi's there on the right-hand side. And Thumper, yeah, that's right. That's the cover of the magazine.
Yeah, the rabbit stuff.
You get things like this, Magic Kingdom, no Mineral King, please pay up, because before the ski area was going to go in, it was free to go there. It's going to cost money. You get local protests. You get marches on Disneyland. God forbid. There was a march on the Disney Board of Directors when they held their meeting. Now, I know all this sort of sounds familiar. These were relatively new tactics. For the environmental movement, they just were really new, actually. Remember now, this movement was sort of getting its sea legs, and actually it was two guys from UCLA that did this kind of stuff, that sort of energized the movement. All right, got dueling bumper stickers, keep Mineral King natural, Sierra Club stay home. Right. So the point I'm trying to make to you is that it was a boiling controversy at this point. So let me just tell you what happens next. The world has changed by 1972. Now the environmental movement is starting to get embedded in laws, and the first thing that the forest has to do is do an environmental impact statement, which they didn't have to do before. That's going to take them several years to do that. The road's still a problem to get over. The state was going to pay for the road, but it was costing more and more money to do it. And there's more and more opposition now to the Mineral King project, particularly in the East Coast. The New York Times is dead against it. And you read that they've written editorials, they called it scandalous. They thought it was so bad. Other newspapers back east took positions against it. The LA Times stood on its head for it. It was so much for it. So you have this battle going on, but it's not going to get done quickly now. It's going to take some time. Where's the money going to come for the road? And what happens now is, over the next several years, the thing gets delayed while they do the impact statement. Disney comes up with an alternative plan. They're going to get rid of the road and put a railroad in instead, which is what Stuart Udall, the secretary that you really wanted. Then it turned out there's all sorts of problems putting a railroad in across a national park. That's where it had to go. And so it ends up in 1978 that the politics in California has changed. Jerry Brown's now the governor, not Pat Brown. Jerry Brown's against it. The 2 senators are against it. Bob Mathias, remember the decathlon guy? He's gone. He loses the 1974 election after the famous Watergate scandal to another interesting guy. He was born in Israel and actually born in Germany, and then worked in Israel and came over here and become a lawyer. And he took a position that Mineral King should be in the national park. So the politics have changed. And so it ends up being put in Sequoia National Park. The last bill passed in the Carter administration in 1978. Let me just say a few sort of academic things about it, then I'll finish up. There's themes in the book. One of the themes is, since the environmental movement is growing, the institutions involved have to evolve. The Sierra Club certainly did. I mean, its original position was they were in favor of the ski area, and they became a much more preservationist organization as it went through, and this was a huge problem with them. I mean, they essentially, not essentially, they did have to utterly change their earlier position, and that cost them, in credibility. There was no question about it. Disney. Disney is the most fascinating character in all this, and I'm always asked, where's your villain in the story? Is it Disney? And it's not Disney at all. Disney simply put a proposal together that the Forest Service had asked for. But more to the point, Disney had this huge record of making movies about conservation. Famous documentaries that had actually won Academy Awards, following, going to Alaska, following animals up there. The Disney company thought of itself as an environmental company. And in fact, it was. Except now they're trying to build this ski area in an area that's magnificent, and they're being attacked right and left. And basically they don't know what to do about it. They defend their proposal, but they're uncomfortable the whole way through. There's no doubt about it. Trying to figure out, it's one reason, by the way, remember I told you that they didn't sue Disney, Sierra Club didn't sue Disney? Disney could have intervened in the case. They chose not to. They didn't want any part of that. They were very worried about how they looked to the public. And they really, I think, basically as an organization, they were offended by all this. They thought this isn't fair to us. If there is a villain, it's the Forest Service. If only because the Forest Service decided they were going to put a ski area. Actually, one guy decided there was going to be a ski area there, and they stood behind that. They always defended it on the ground that they had analyzed this thing, they'd done studies. They'd done no such thing. They had done nothing to study the area. They just decided this is a good place for a ski area because they put ski areas in all over the country. Been to Aspen, part of that's on Forest Service lands. There was an environmental component they had to consider now. And so it was harder for them to change. They always refused adamantly even to hold a public hearing about it. Why do that? We don't have to do it. We decided what we're going to do. After 1972, their culture had to change. They held a public hearing, so things had changed for them. So seeing how the institutions grappled with this case and with the environmental movement generally is one theme in the book. So Walt Disney, I told you that they really thought of themselves as environmentalists. The Disney company was going to put the ski area in, but they were adamant that they were going to preserve Mineral King. They thought they could, that you could put the ski area in there and that preserve Mineral King's majesty. Well, I mean, it depends on how you define preserving Mineral King. But the one thing that Disney never did was come to grips with that problem. What does it mean to preserve the area? I mean, some ski areas. The problem was the development that they proposed was going to be huge. very large. In part because, they're a private company, but in part because that's what the Forest Service wanted. And this idea that you could somehow build a huge ski development in a pristine, gorgeous area and yet preserve the area, that conflict, they never could come to grips with it. Corporate response to public issues, I think I mentioned that. Disney had to figure out what it was going to do publicly and try to respond. This was all over the newspapers, all over the country. They're very concerned with their name. You can still today, they're very concerned with their name. How are we going to respond to it? It was a problem for them. 4 is, well, I guess it's a little legal. One of the interesting things about the Forest Service here is when they approved the development originally, they didn't even pay attention to what the law said. They just assumed they could do it because they had a lot of power. And what you saw here, I'll just tell you a quick story. The Disney, when the Sierra Club decided to sue, then they ran across the street, got the lawyer, right? He went to the library to start to look at what he could sue on, because they didn't have any ideas at this point. And one of the most interesting things they found was, remember that the road went across Sequoia National Park to get to Mineral King? They found this statute buried in there that said that if you have a power line going across Sequoia National Park, Congress has to approve it. You have to have legislation buried in there. Well, where was the power going to come for the ski development? It was going to have to come right across Sequoia National Park. That's one of the issues that got raised in the case. There were a number of issues that they found, and as a result of this, public agencies became much more attuned to what the law said. It was a total turnaround, and today, they don't do anything without making sure that they have authority for what they're doing. And finally, the last interesting question is, was it the right decision to put Mineral King in Sequoia National Park as opposed to building a ski area? And I don't have any opinions. I mean, that's basically a political question, what you want to do with it. But I will say this. One of the arguments that the Sierra Club had, remember, or maybe I can go back to it if I can do that. One of the first thing I had up there, you remember that Sequoia National Park basically surrounded Mineral King? And one of the strong arguments that the Sierra Club had was, this was an historical mistake. This thing should have been in the park, and it belongs in the park. And I think that's the strongest argument they had for putting it in there. If it hadn't been surrounded by Sequoia National Park, there'd be a ski area in there now. I think there's some other reasons as well. I think this idea of the insistence that they were going to preserve it, in the end you couldn't preserve it. So I don't know what the right decision is, but I think those kind of themes tell you why it came out the way it did. Okay. This is what Disney said what they were going to do there. The greatest chapter of the Disney conservation story is being written. It is with Mineral King that our company will prove more dramatically and emphatically than ever that preservation of natural beauty and resources need not be assured at the expense of enjoying that beauty. That's what they thought they could do there. And they were serious about it. I mean, they believed that. And this is a promise from Walt Disney. You can't see it there. It basically says the same thing. That we're going to preserve Mineral King even as we... And he also said, by the way, that we know we're going to have to grow the area because the population is going to get bigger. So how you put those two together, I think, was a big problem for them. Something else I wanted to mention later. That's all I have. That's what the book's about. It's about the entire battle over Mineral King at a time when the environmental movement was burgeoning and coming to life, and the legal part of that was what this case was about. After Sierra Club versus Morton, that's why you see so many environmental lawsuits today, because ultimately the groups have very little trouble normally getting standing to sue. Rhonda, you want to talk to me or something?
No, I don't want to talk to you at all.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much. I think everybody can understand how this book is a page turner. I mean, every chapter it was like, and then you'll find out what happened. I'm like, oh my God, what's gonna happen next? It is a very fun and educational book to read. I really enjoyed reading it, just want to say that. But I have a couple questions for you, and a couple that I didn't tell you about, but I just thought of.
I'm a law professor, we make up answers, it's fine.
Go for it. So you mentioned that Walt Disney passed away. He passed away early on, pretty early on in this project. Do you think it would have changed? I mean, I know that in the book you talk about how his brother Roy and the Disney company really wanted to keep his project alive for him, which is, another reason why they kept their feet in this all this time. But do you think that things would have been different had he lived?
Two things. You can't underestimate how powerful the force was within the Disney company to honor Walt Disney's last big project. And this was in the people who were at the highest level of the corporation. Actually, not Roy so much, interesting, he's one, but in the other people. They did not want to give up on this. In about 1975, one of the people there wrote a memo, internal memo, that laid out all the problems they had at this point. And it goes on for pages. And you read the memo, and the only rational decision, if you read that, is we should drop this right now. It's never going to happen. And it wasn't going to happen. They went on with it. That was very powerful. Now, would it have changed if Walt Disney had lived? I have no idea. I mean, I can't tell you, except the odd thing about it is that Disney was very concerned with conservation. There's no question about it. You should watch one of these movies sometime. I'm sure they're around somewhere on the Disney Channel. They were remarkable. The Sierra Club gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award because of them. So he had this, he understood conservation. As the movement went on, who knows what he would have done. I think it would have stopped sooner because a rational businessman would have stopped it sooner. There were too many problems by 1974.
And they put out a lot of money over that decade, too.
Yeah, they did put a lot of money, and they tried to get it back when it went into Sequoia National Park, but the congressman I showed you up there said, nope, no.
And then the other thing is you talked about the environmental report that hadn't been written and there was an avalanche in that area that they pretty much ignored, the dangers.
Yeah, in 1969, right before the lawsuit was filed, there were some people working in there for Disney doing snow measurement, and they had a horrendous avalanche. And a guy was killed there. I mean, he was in a cabin, and there was snow 12 feet over the top of the cabin, and he asphyxiated. This was certainly an avalanche-prone area. The assumption always was, though, that ski areas tend to be in avalanche-prone areas, and that they would be able to deal with it in some fashion. Remember Psycho back there? Mm-hmm. Well, the guy, her husband, Brant, the one that was competing with Disney, his big point against Disney was, we looked at avalanches, Disney didn't. Mm-hmm. And he was, to an extent, he was right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I just wanted to bring up those 2 points. So can you please talk to us about...
Were those the 2 zingers I wasn't asked before?
Yeah,
okay, got it.
You did very well.
Thank you,
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah.
How did you get interested in writing this book?
2 things. I was in law school when the decision came down from the Supreme Court taking an environmental law class, and read it, and they described Mineral King in there. I thought, this is great, so we went and saw it, and it's, like I said, it's just spectacular. And so that got me interested in it. And then I taught the case over the years, but what sort of drew my interest again, this is the last slide actually, I can explain it, I guess we don't have it. Can we get the last ones up again?
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John. Sorry. I think about 10 years ago, I guess. This is an area in West Virginia called Blair Mountain. Anybody ever heard of Blair Mountain? Or what do you know about Blair Mountain?
I'm writing my dissertation on mine reclamation, and specifically in Pennsylvania. So I'm very interested in coal and labor history in that area.
Blair Mountain is the site of the largest battle on American soil other than the Civil War.
Wow.
And it was a battle between the miners and the coal company, all the people they hired, they were shooting at each other. This area is like sacred ground to the United Mine Workers. Unfortunately, it's owned by a coal company who wanted to strip mine it. And so the Sierra Club brought a suit, and there was a lot of, this is the last slide here, I promise you, wrong way. You can see the, there we go. Nope, wrong way. I'm sorry, I have it upside down. John, this is not good. All right, here.
Wait, there's not one more?
One more, here we go. Maybe you'll never see it. There it is.
There it is.
You can see the fight. Anyway, through a strange bunch of events, I ended up representing people who were preservationists trying to preserve Blair Mountain back in DC. And it turned out the issue in the case was standing. Why was standing an issue there when it was pretty much settled? And the answer was, if you think about Mineral King, you could walk on and use Mineral King, show your injury. Nobody could enter the land. It was private land. So you had to show you were injured even though you couldn't go on the land. And so there was a standing issue. That got me thinking about it again. And so I decided to look into it, and I thought this might make an interesting law review article. And then things went haywire.
Well, I don't think so, but.
Yeah, they went haywire.
All right. So in an interview I read, you said that you, quote, learned a lot about the craft practiced by historians. We may have budding historians here tonight, so can you talk about what you learned and how it affected you writing this book?
Sure. And I was a history major in college, but I'd never done any historical work. So, but I don't know if you know any law professors, but we think we can do anything. So we launched ourselves into this. I launched myself into it. I learned several things. One is, God bless librarians, for starters, because we had people at, listen, I'm a card-carrying person. There was one member of the library staff at Loyola that was unbelievably helpful to me in finding things about what was written, I couldn't have done it without her. At the end, Laura Cadra, who's there now, helped me out with pictures. They're phenomenal. I learned that. I learned you're utterly dependent upon archivists. So I ended up running around the country. I think I went to 10 archives. Spent so much time in UC Berkeley up there because the Sierra Club stuff up there. The government stuff was either in San Bruno, California, up near San Francisco, or in Maryland at the big depository. I spent a lot of time in Maryland up there. Now you go in there and you say, you want something on Mineral King in 1960. You have no idea where it is or what it is. You find these guys and they find it for you. They know where it is. They say, well, we'll bring this. I got it all through them. So I learned about that. The rest of it was sort of trial and error. I was very lucky. I was at the tail end of this when a lot of the key people were still alive. Remember the picture I had of Roy Disney there? The guy to the left of him is a guy named Bob Hicks, who was in charge of the development for Disney the whole way through. He was the guy that was in charge of it. Lived in Pasadena, for that matter. He was still alive. I was able to go up there and talk to him. And he was very nice to me. The Forest Service guy who was in charge of it was still alive, never went in charge. First thing he asked me was I a member of the Sierra Club? You're talking about how many years later? It still was a big deal for him. So I learned sort of how you find these people. Digging them out nationwide. I was very lucky to find a whole bunch of people that were alive and remembered it well. You have to find the documents, right? Yeah. The Disney company isn't known for opening up its vaults. Right? They let me into the place. I had former students that worked there, so I had some connections, but they're not going to show you all the archives. But Bob Hicks had saved all his papers and donated them to a library, and they took you all the way through it. So I was lucky to get that. The rest of it was easier because as a lawyer, I'm used to cases and large amounts of documents. What I did was simply copy everything. I have 75 4-inch binders, paper. I put them all in chronological order and started reading. Wow. And that and the interviews let me put the whole thing together. So that's what I learned. And of course, historians, they know about this stuff to begin with, right? I guess the answer is, though, if you're going to choose a topic, don't choose one where the stuff's all over the country.
Unless you're rich.
Yeah, well, I have to say I got a lot of support from the law school. They were at a sabbatical one semester, and they were very supportive.
Very nice. So you teased me, but I feel truly that this book is a page turner, and it isn't always the case when I read things for this pub night event. But I just want to know how.
Do you tell all of us that? It's not usually a page turner, but your book's a page turner?
I'm not naming any names, no. So, how did you use the fictional style approach to keep that roller coaster ride going from chapter to chapter?
You know, I really appreciate that you sort of ascribe this talent to me. But I got to be honest with you, it just happened. The tale worked out that way. Things happened at various times, and they were surprising. I mean, Walt Disney died one day, and that made a big difference, you know. In the Supreme Court, he put the foot, screwed the thing. I mean, nobody knew about that until we found it in the archives there. At various times, different things happened, and they sort of lended themselves. It was the tale, the whole tale of it that had these sort of hooks to bring you through. I mean, I'd like to take responsibility for writing it that way, but I think it just lent itself to that.
Well, it is a good tale. I mean, it truly is. And there's so much involved in it. I mean, you showed some of the things, the themes, and it's also ego. Ego played a big part in a lot of this. Dumb luck played a part of this. Carelessness on certain people. I mean, it's just so many characters, and it was just fascinating.
Politicians in the middle of this, politics.
Yep.
I mean, I showed you the Secretary of the Interior. I didn't show you the Secretary of Agriculture, Orville Freeman. He was the Forest Service boss. He wanted this thing. Secretary of the Interior didn't want it. Huge egos, battles there going through. It just is different. They're different than businessmen. There's the Sierra Club folks. My one disappointment was John Harper had died, and I would have loved to have talked to him.
And it was fascinating to read how the Sierra Club changed over those years. I mean, they really did change as an organization.
Yeah, they were an organization essentially built on the idea of promoting access to the mountains, to hike, to ski, that stuff. And before this, it started to dawn on them that access was maybe not, really good all the time. I mean, one of the things they were terrified about was that the road to Mineral King was going to be a big road, would go through Mineral King and go across the Sierras and end up the other side. So, I mean,
Yeah.
they changed as they went through, no question about it.
Yeah. Okay, so on the other side, one of the things that always complicated my reading was the dual permits. You need to explain that to me. Because they were complex.
Did you want to put them to sleep for the last 5 minutes? Is that the idea?
Well, can you just vaguely explain it? And why they were important?
Yeah, the reason, okay, here's what the deal was. The Forest Service had to grant a permit for Disney, right? And they had statute that said that they could do it, but there was a limit on the number of acreages that they could grant a permit for. I think it was 80 acres, if I recall correctly. And they'd gotten around this all over the country. The 80-acre permit was for a longer period of years, but what they also had power to grant individual permits for a year. So what they do is they grant you the permit for 80, and for the rest of it, they grant you yearly permits. Now, anybody who built the ski area, they knew the Forest Service was, they were going to get the permit every year. The Forest Service wasn't going to come back and say, no, we're not going to do it. This was a way of getting around the 80 acres. And it had been just accepted. They'd done it all over the place. Sierra Club looked at that and said, you can't do that. The 80 acres is intended to be a limit for ski areas. You're not allowed, you want a bigger limit? Go back to Congress and get the law changed. Now, that's what the dispute was. Now, why was it a big deal? When the ski folks found out about this case, they went berserk. Because what they were worried about was, you had all these ski areas that were built on the exact same idea. And if it turned out it was illegal here, what was going to happen to some of these ones that they've been going to for years? That's why it became such a big deal. And that was one of those things that was sort of lurking back there as an issue that the Forest Service never really paid a whole lot of attention to.
I didn't like the Forest Service. They really,
They're the bad guys.
they really are the bad. Yeah.
As an organization, they were a user organization that had a lot of trouble changing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but I mean, when you meet the people that work there, I mean, these were very capable, you know, honest people, no question about that. Just as an organization, they just had different goals.
Well, and I sort of felt that they were kind of under the spell of Disney also.
Oh, there's no question about
Yeah.
that. You didn't get to see a picture of the one guy who was really in charge of it, Slim Davis. I think it's one of those ski areas outside Colorado. It's not Aspen, I forget which one it is. You can go there and there's a Slim Davis.
Was it Vales?
Maybe it's Vail, yeah. There's a Slim Davis run there. I mean, he was a famous guy all over the country. But he was a skier. And he wanted this thing. And he wanted Disney. And of course he wanted Disney. He was smart. I mean, the reason they took Disney instead of Brandt was, and Brandt actually had, I think, a more detailed proposal, had been at it longer. Disney had more money. That was a big deal to them. They'd had a lot of people that applied for ski permits without a lot of money, and it caused them trouble. Disney had money, and Disney was Disney. They were going to do it right. As a matter of fact, in their literature, the Forest Service said, we know it's going to be a ski area because Disney's doing it. And you know, and probably true for that matter, I think. You know, if they'd have built it, it would have been fabulous.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't like Disneyland, do you?
I'm
No.
really not a Disney person. I was very happy reading it.
There are a lot of Disney people, I found out, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we would like to hear any of you have questions. And I will give up. Thank you, Joan. Give up mine. And does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
This is a little bit off subject, but not entirely. What is the impression that you have in regards to the Chevron problem that the Supreme Court is having to deal with now?
Sure.
And how will that impact things like this?
Sure. Let me give you, I'm going to talk for the next 15 minutes on what is known as the Chevron Doctrine. You're going to love it. The basic idea of the Chevron Doctrine is this, that if you have a statute that has ambiguity in it, you then get an agency like EPA or the Forest Service that interprets it, courts will honor that interpretation. In other words, the court won't say, no, it's our job to figure out what the statute reads. What they say is, as long as the agency's interpretation is reasonable, we'll uphold it. Which moved a lot of power into agencies. Yeah. When the Chevron case came down about, 1975, maybe, something like that. They called the Chevron Doctrine. The Supreme Court heard a case this week. They're going to reconsider that. They're apparently going to overturn it. Yeah. So what's going to happen now is that the courts are going to be the ones that have more power to interpret statutes than the agencies do. Now, how's this going to affect things? Well, the Chevron Doctrine, it was neutral, and it depended on which agency was in place. You're going to defer to Biden's EPA. You're going to defer to Trump's EPA, and you get different interpretations depending on who's in there. And the same thing will happen, I think, with the statutes. It'll depend on which judges are in the courts and how they look at it. But it's certainly going to transfer power back to the courts if they do it. Not entirely convinced they will, but it seems like they will. It's a good question.
Anyone else have a question? Yes, in the back.
Hi Dan, thank you. This is really, really interesting. I'm a new professor in urban and environmental studies.
Oh.
And the uncanny thing about listening to your presentation is I've been doing some research on a very different space-time that has all of the major hits of this story. A particular project in Chile and Patagonia that has a dead magnate, that has the enrollment of powerful politicians, a lot of money on the line, legal ambiguity, a a mineral-rich carve-out in the middle of a national park, all like very similar residences. So it was really amazing to sort of also be reminded, as all historians remind us, that nothing is new, right?
That's true.
And so I am somebody that's been thinking a lot about philanthropists move into this space of environmental policy, environmental governance through voluntary projects and private projects, right? I think these days there are a lot of billionaires in this space and mega millionaires in this space, right? Everything from the Bezos Earth Fund to the guy I was studying who started the North Face and was affiliated with Patagonia Inc., right? My question for you is, based on this historical work that you've done now, where do you see the sort of state philanthropy, conservation writ large space going, right? There are more and more rich people that are trying to claim conservation policy and governance as their own through private means. So that's one question. And the adjunct is sort of, you planted, one of your themes has to do with, was it right for them to be, for the Disney Corporation, they never really got clear about what it would mean to actually both preserve that valley and also have human use of it in very particular ways. And yet that's the exact challenge of private conservation, right? It's private actors getting to decide what conservation means, often in extra legal ways or outside of frameworks of things like, the IUCN conservation categories. So that's one thing, right? Sort of where do you see these new private state partnerships going in the environmental realm? And then the second question is, standing, I see how standing is a big issue here. What about the Forestry Service's multiple use mandate? Does that come into play also in sort of the way that it acts as the big baddie here?
I think I'm going to answer your last question first because it's easier. The Forest Service, if you go into the National Forest, land of many uses, it used to say, I think it still does. Yeah, the Forest Service thought of itself as maximizing the use. It's a multiple use agency. And it tended to think of that maximization as the most people using it, and they tended to maximize the amount of money they could charge for it too. That's the multiple use part of it was built into this. There's no question about that. It was at the core of what they were doing. As far as the other thing, I mean, the one thing that strikes me about it is, as I told you, the Forest Service just decided what it was going to do here and went full steam ahead to do it without really looking at, and the Forest Service saw no problem at all with putting a ski area, center headquarters right in the middle of a wildlife refuge. But as American environmental law has developed, one thing we do now is we examine the impacts of what we're doing before we do it. I mean, that's built into the structure of environmental law. It delays things, no question about that. And we'll also litigate over it a lot too, which delays things further. There's a time lag built in now, which for huge decisions is probably a good idea. I mean, you don't want to make huge decisions quickly. But that idea that the process that's built into there is what you don't have when you have private philanthropists just deciding what to do. And I think that's dangerous, actually. I mean, because it was dangerous for what the Forest Service did there. They didn't know what the impact was going to be on Mineral King. So as I told you, they said we've been studying that. You can read the letter that was written by the head of the Forest Service talking about all the studies they've been done about this all these years. Well, I don't know. I went through the archives. There weren't any. They just thought this was a good idea and we're going to do it. It's that thrust, I think, that's scary, frankly. But as far as other thoughts on where it's going now, I don't have any thoughts on that. I don't know much about it, except they're trying to build a new town in outside of Solano County. You see that one up there? The new? Yeah, but now they have to have an initiative. They have to convince the voters of Solano. It's a bunch of private tech millionaires that want to build a new city up there. But they have to pass an initiative. And if I were betting, that will fail. I'd be interested to see. So anyway, I don't have a whole lot more to add to you. It sounds very interesting, though.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Thanks for speaking, Professor Selmi. Discussion's been absolutely fascinating so far. This actually is one a little off topic, but I think considering your area of expertise, you'll be able to speak to it. And I was going to ask about what you think of the situation with water, coming out of Colorado and the basin and water use in California, and how you think government and state policy is going to affect that outcome going forward.
You mean the fact there isn't any water?
Yeah.
And I saw in somewhere today, you read Sammy Roth in the LA Times? You should. Sammy Roth covers climate change and water issues, and he's got a newsletter that's just fabulous. He was very nice. He interviewed me. A big spread in the LA Times to come. It also turns out I taught his mother in law school. That might have helped. I don't know where, I can't tell you where all that's going to go, except there's just not enough water. But I was on the water pollution board for Orange County for about 4 years, and we dealt with a big desalination project called Poseidon that was going to go in off the coast. That we approved it with a lot of conditions. The Coastal Commission turned it flat down. And one of the things that struck me is Orange County has this huge, very successful reclamation of water system in there. You probably think, what, Orange County? No, it's really big, it's really successful, it's like a model, and there's still, when we were looking at Poseidon, one of the interesting things, they were going to use, there was a discharge of water now into the ocean from the pollution control facility that's there, and they were going to, instead of reclaiming that water, what they were going to do is use the discharge from the desalination plant to add to it. There's a lot of water out there that can still be reclaimed and reused, and I think you're going to see a lot more movement in that direction. And maybe you see more in desalination plants, but I would expect that to happen. There's a lot of movement, a lot of room to move in conservation in ways that I think people should be pretty comfortable with. That's about all I know about that. I'm not a natural resource specialist, really.
Remember the name Sammy Roth.
Yeah, you should read his stuff. He really covers this in a lot of depth, and do it before the LA Times goes out of business. Yeah.
Or lay him off at least.
Well, yeah, he puts a newsletter out and he links to all these articles. You should read it. This will bring you up to date on what's happening. The thing that struck me about it was at Lake Mead that still is going to be way low this year. And I would have thought after all that water last year, but no.
Any other questions? Do you have any other questions?
Hi, Professor. Thanks so much for speaking. It was super informative, and I can't wait to read the book. Have you seen this case's influence in how other ski resorts kind of handle the problem of because I know a lot of ski resorts now kind of talk out one side of their mouth about preserving the environment, but on the one hand, I know that they have a huge impact on the environment. So have you seen other ski resorts or ski resort development companies kind of interacting with this case in different ways? And if so, how?
No. But I'll tell you what I have seen.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen a lot of new ski areas built in the last 40 years? No. The environmental movement essentially put an end to anything that's going to look like Mineral King, a new area in a pristine area, and it's difficult even to expand now. And that's, I think, a distinct consequence of Sierra Club versus Morton.
So what is Mineral King like now? I mean, does it get a lot of visitors? I've never been there. I don't know anything about it.
Well, you can't go there now because the road closes usually about November 1st because it's filled with snow, and it'll remain closed until, I think it was until June last year, something like that, because we had so much snow. So your chance to go there is really during the summer. You have to go on the road. We talked about going on the road. It's a dirt road, and it takes you, I don't know, an hour and a half to get in there or something like that. And then you just sit there going, wow. And if you're a hiker, you want to hike out of there because there's beautiful lakes ringing the top up there. It basically is the same place it was, except they've had one development that's new. Well, two developments. One now is it's run by the Park Service because it's in National Park now. It's part of Sequoia. The other thing are marmots. You know about marmots? Marmots love to eat transmission fluid. So if you go to Mineral King and you park, they will get under your car and go up there and chew through the transmission fluid. Now you think this is cute, right? No, they do this all the time. So when you go up there now, they give you some sort of, it's like a netting that you have to put under your car to keep the marmots out. And the last time we were there, the car next to us didn't have it, and we looked over there, and what was crawling under the car? A marmot.
Wow.
So,
Okay, maybe I'm not going there.
What is a marmot, some sort of rodent?
what is a marmot?
Yeah.
You don't know what a marmot is?
No idea.
It's a small furry animal that is common to high altitudes, I think. Yeah, you Google it. You'll see them there.
Like
Huh?
a gigantic squirrel?
Yeah, sort of a gigantic squirrel. They're very cute, but they have sharp teeth. And they'll go after your car, and then you're stuck up there with a car that won't run, an hour and a half from anything that looks like a towing service.
Wow.
Not good.